Hello there. All right. Now, I know you've been recommending this for a few days. I have a long list of things. Thank you for jumping in the chat. It basically pushed me to do it today. And like I said, I'm going to upload this a little later than usual. But Ashoka the Great, Rise of the Mauryan Empire, a documentary of it. And I don't know how this is, but just by the thumbnail, it looks like I'd be interested in the type of animation they're using. Hopefully it has like a, what is it, Risk or Age of Empires, or, you know, those classic board or strategy games where it's an overhead view and then you see groups. If they do something like that, I think I'd enjoy the animation style. Just saying. If not, still, I would enjoy learning.
The 3rd century BC was a notoriously violent time, filled with titanic clashes and amazing personalities. Alexander's conquests gave way to a period of constant warfare between his Seleucid, Ptolemaic, and Antigonid successors, while the rising Roman juggernaut began a series of conquests to unite the Italian peninsula and fought its Carthaginian rival, paving the way for future dominance. India during this period was also experiencing revolutionary change, which culminated in the rise of the Mauryan Empire and the reign of Ashoka the Great. 326 BC, Alexander the Great crossed the Hindu Kush mountains and entered India for the first time, calling his veteran army to a halt at the Indus River and demanding that 2 rival kings in the region, Omphis and Porus, come to him and submit. Omphis of Taxila surrendered to Alexander, but Porus of Purava resisted and forced Alexander into a climactic battle at the Hydaspes River, which he won nonetheless. Wishing to conquer all India, Alexander marched onward, but his army mutinied at the Hyphasis River and he was forced to withdraw to Babylon. Their refusal to march on was in part due to rumours of a massive Indian kingdom possessing innumerable legions further to the east. This was the Nanda Empire, centred on the Magadha region, which supposedly fielded a colossal force of 250,000 infantry, cavalry, chariots and war elephants. Though he had retreated, Alexander's conquests had
Yeah, because I believe he conquered almost everything, and it was just India where he pushed them back. And of course he ran his forces a little too thin, taking in other forces from other places he had conquered, and eventually they're all going to mutiny. And when you come to an area where you haven't really seen elephants used in battlefield and things like that, of course your own people will mutiny after a while.
Stabilized northern India, a fact which would play a key role in what was to come. Once the historical shroud falls away once again, we see in 320 BC that it was a man named Chandragupta Maurya who stood victorious. This Indian conqueror's origins are not clear, but less favourable Brahmin sources state that he was a Shudra, a peasant or serf, whilst more favourable Buddhist texts designate him as a member of the prestigious Kshatriya or warrior caste.
It's insane how sometimes history is retold to suit the narrative. So I'm pretty sure the lower class communities all viewed him as one of their own. The people in temples and beliefs all viewed him as coming from their upbringing. He's a prophet born to it's always fascinating how stories get retold and the origin gets lost. I'm pretty sure the origin was actually in the text in the Alexandria library, but that's no longer.
He likely knew about Alexander's stunning conquests and was given a crash course in ancient warfare, tactics and geopolitics, which he would use to conquer his own empire. Having gathered followers, he initially attacked the Nanda Empire's capital, but failed a few times. Then he changed his tactics and conquered the northwestern lands, which had been weakened by Alexander, using his subsequent control of these prosperous regions to cut off supplies to the capital, resulting in the fall of the Nanda dynasty.
See, that is true conquest. You take over the resources. As long as you stop the resources, a city, any region cannot exist if the resources get cut off. As long as you do that, it's gonna fall apart. The people will mutiny. The people will revolt. The people will turncoat and join the opposing side because they have the resources they have kept away from you. And in the end, to most common folk, a new ruler is a new ruler, exactly the same, especially when they're, unless you go from certain type of, if you go from a dictatorship to like all the different types of, governments and structures. If you go from one to another, it's a huge change. But if you're literally going from just one leader to another leader, there's not much of a change. Just like here in the US, every 4 years, possibly a new president is put into office, and it's still the exact same situation every year, or every 4 years. There's always a big panic, a big issue, and then nothing happens, nothing changes. It always is the same because government, no matter what, will always get in the way. So sorry, off topic.
After establishing his realm, he fought, decisively defeated, and made an alliance with Seleucus, famously gifting him 500 war elephants in exchange for peace and the hand of Seleucus's daughter in marriage. Chandragupta's successor, Bindusara, continued his father's wise domestic and foreign policies, such as his friendship with Seleucus and his religious tolerance. In addition, he thrust south into the Deccan Plateau and expanded the empire. It is the second of Bindusara's 3 sons who is the subject of this video, Ashoka, whose eldest brother was Suzima and whose youngest brother was Tisia. It seemed as though the future Mauryan emperor at this point had no chance of ever inheriting the throne. For one, his mother, Superdrangi, was a commoner, while the crown prince and favourite child, Suzima's mother, was a royal princess. Nevertheless, Indian princes were often sent to govern faraway provinces, and Ashoka was no different. At the age of 18, the young Mauryan royal was sent to the cosmopolitan Silk Road hub of Taxila to quell a revolt, a task he supposedly accomplished quickly. The nature of Taxila as a scholarly and cosmopolitan settlement, where intellectual debates...
This history is kind of reminding me of Bahubali. Yeah, love that movie. But I guess every story has been told or re-envisioned in a different light, but the fact that all the sons... which one's going to inherit the throne? There's probably going to be a challenge, and the one who's, fit for it.
Were often had among different faiths would have improved Ashoka's knowledge of the world, as well as making him more tolerant and sophisticated.
That's something I like, the understanding of other beliefs. I don't like the mindset of, because you're of a different belief, we can't commune, we can't talk. It's the fact that he becomes more tolerant and more understanding and more worldly. And worldly is kind of a negative, has a negative connotation, but it's not exactly a bad thing to understand where other people are coming from. And the fact that he's growing as a person, just 18, I guess, I like that, because it seems like that's lost now. And what's funny is the world is so open to everyone, and even more people are more closed off because it's so easy to find yourself in a small group online. I mean, look at Twitter. It's everyone just congregates to their small little corners, and yeah.
His next appointment was at the important city of Ujjaini, capital of Avanti province. The high quality of the governorship that Ashoka provided is shown by the fact that he was entrusted with this station, that of administering a crucial region connecting the capital city and the coast. It was in this new station that Ashoka fell in love with Devi, the daughter of a trader. Interestingly, she was a member of the Sakya clan, the clan of Siddhartha Gautama, the Buddha himself. It is widely thought that she was a Buddhist upon bearing Ashoka his 2 children, their son Mahendra and their daughter Sanghamitra. This relatively peaceful life would come to an end when in 274 BC, Emperor Bindusara passed away. What happened next is the subject of much debate, but it is thought that a brief
That's the thing. It's like, I would love to know exactly what happened through history. I would love to know, because every time it's retold, like every different perspective, from winning side, losing side, people who weren't even there will come up with their own opinion as to what's going on. It's always, and to actually witness what happened, to actually know what happened. And I know the world basically holds the secrets of what has happened in the past, but how do you read that? How do you read the incidences of the past? We don't have the ability to, so we can just speculate.
A 4-year civil war occurred between Ashoka and his brothers. By acting decisively and swiftly occupying the capital city, and because he was supported by his father's ministers, Ashoka reigned victorious over his brother and was crowned as emperor in 270 BC, the same year Hannibal Barca was born in Carthage.
Kind of reminds me of the puppets.
After he had ascended to the throne, Ashoka continued a policy of expansion and conquest. One of the reasons for this persistent policy of warfare was that in this period all Indian rulers wished to be regarded as the Chakravartin, the king of kings, by their royal rivals.
So,
practical and economic reasons were also important, as taxes were the Mauryan Empire's main source of revenue. The more land a king conquered, the more taxes he gained. However, the more administrative and military expenses would also pile up, leading to an endless cycle of violence. So it was that in the year 262 BC, the massive Mauryan army marched into the kingdom of Kalinga. Their past successes would likely have made them confident of an easy victory, but the king and his army faced a tough, grinding conflict against a doggedly courageous enemy. It is said that Ashoka eventually won the war, not because Kalinga surrendered, but because the carnage was so terrible. After the final battle, the victorious monarch stood amongst his dead and dying foes on the battlefield. Most monarchs would have simply rejoiced in the grim victory, but Ashoka, in this moment, felt horror and remorse. It ended up being the key moment of his life. Supposedly, 150,000 were therefrom captured, 100,000 were slain, and many times that died from famine and disease. More than just being horrified by the direct results of the devastation he had wrought, Ashoka also was acutely aware of the tragedy that struck those left behind, the young sons left without fathers, and poor mothers who had been robbed of their sons, their families and loved ones.
The people around him.
The educated and sensitive Ashoka appears to have been made truly aware of the real cost of war, even admitting publicly what no victorious ruler ever had before, that he felt remorse on having conquered Kalinga, declaring that even 100th or 1000th part of those who were slain, died or captured in Kalinga is considered regrettable by the beloved of the gods. This was clearly not the same man speaking who had annihilated his brother and had seized the throne by blood. Rather, it was a changed man, finally admitting to his mistakes and thinking on the futility and tragedy of war. Henceforth, said the king, he was not going to be provoked into bearing arms again, and also dedicated his life and huge wealth towards building a society where people lived by the rules of virtue and good moral behavior.
It's strange, because that seems like how India is still living to this day. Is it that? Because it's literally civil war. It was civil war, and when you've destroyed, well, huge, it's to be scarred so much to basically establish virtue and moral behavior and setting that as the guiding principle for your people, and regrettably admitting your mistakes. As, I mean, what rulers do. I mean, even now, what person would go back and say, oh, I'm sorry, I did this wrong. I shouldn't have done this. Oh, in 2020, we should have done this differently. We should have done this differently. We shouldn't have done this. No one is going to go and say that. No one would dare say that. Why? Because it would show weakness. However, most people, most civilized people would see it as, you know, a strength, a fact that this is someone worth following. They know they are wrong. They've known they've done something wrong. They're willing to admit it. They're willing to fix it.
This abrupt change of heart gradually led Ashoka to the teachings of Siddhartha Gautama, the Buddha, who had preached the same values of peace, non-violence and benevolence 2 centuries earlier. Ashoka had likely known of Buddhism from an early age, as his wife was an adherent of the Buddha's teachings and the faith was popular within certain segments of the population. However, he was the first king in history to convert to this apparently revolutionary religion. Contrary to what popular legends depict, Ashoka did not instantly convert to Buddhism after his change of heart on the field of war, but thoughtfully and practically chose a slow path which would benefit both him and the welfare of his subjects. Particular care was taken to remain tolerant of the two other dominant Indian religions, the Hindu Brahmanic faith and Jainism. In one of his major edicts, carved on a rock, he stated that should one blame other religions or overglorify one's own religion, they are instead doing harm to it, an act which should not be done. He began to study under Buddhist monks, and 2 years later was accepted into the Sangha, the Buddhist order. His tutor was a monk named Bhikkhu Upagupta of Mathura.
It's so fascinating that still to this day, we need to learn things that were obviously well known in the past. The old adage is true: if you forget your past, you're doomed to repeat it. Is that the adage? Something like that. But it's obvious. You have to be able, those people who think they're on their high horse because they're overly religious and refuse to listen to someone about theirs, just saying you're wrong and you're not gonna be saved or whatever it may be, whatever the belief is for everyone. It just seems so close-minded. I've always thought that was close-minded when I hear people just go straight to that. Oh, this is gonna happen. This is gonna happen. This is gonna happen. They're just like, just talk with them. Just understand. Just learn someone else's perspective. Heck, when I was in college, I had Muslim friends, Hindu friends. I had Catholic friends. I had a Buddhist friend. I had a ton of friends. Well, some were friends. Some people I don't talk to anymore. But I'm someone who I'll talk to people when I'm there. And then after I don't see them no more, I'm terrible at keeping in touch with people. I'm absolutely terrible at keeping in touch with people. It's not that I don't care. It's just that I don't like texting or being on my phone, or I like this. I like this. Is there something so wrong with this? Yeah, but it's so fascinating that we have to go back and still, like, things I've always thought, here he is preaching to his entire people, telling them that, like, this is the mindset you should have. Don't think you're better than anyone, because you're not doing yourself any justice. Like, anyone who starts belittling another person's religion, immediately you start disliking that person and their religion. It happens the same thing with everything that's, I hate to go back to what's going on with the social activism, but they're targeting everyone, and you're giving people a target for their aggravation by saying it's because, you know, insane. It just look to the past and learn the teachings that they've taught us.
Who took the king on a pilgrimage of all the important sites in their shared faith, such as Lumbini, where Siddhartha Gautama had been born, Bodh Gaya, where he had achieved enlightenment, Sarnath, where he had delivered his first lecture, and Kushinagar, where he had died and gained nirvana. At all of these places and more, Ashoka erected pillars and carved rocks with his edicts and royal orders. These proclamations were routinely read out to the illiterate population by the empire's officials, and appeared to be personal messages from Ashoka himself, clearly in his own words. It is also as though the king's voice speaks to us 2,500 years later when we read them today. His change in faith also changed his role as the king. Rather than desiring material gain, which so many kings had in the past, he now sought that his children obtain every kind of welfare, both in this and the next world, and dictated that reporters could come to him with the people's business wherever he might be at whatever time. Despite all of this piety,
the more you give to your people, the more power you obtain in the long run. The more you support your community, the stronger you will be as a ruler. If you give to your people everything they need to live, everything, the education, the food, if you strive hard to give them that, basically removing gold from your own palace, your people will even become to worship you. You can gain so much more power by making sure your people are well off. And it seems like he well understood that.
And benevolence, we must always keep in mind that Ashoka was an emperor above all else, not a religious teacher or a philosopher. He had the duty of running an empire, and this was not always a job which led to peaceful outcomes. There was a serious danger that once Ashoka's supposed pacifism had been announced, the provinces would rebel and neighboring kings would invade, sensing weakness in the Mauryan leadership. However, the emperor, while he had given up on aggressive conquest, would reluctantly but fiercely defend his empire and refused to disband his army. Every rebellion would still be put down brutally, and any foreign invader would be met with devastating military force, a fact which he made clear.
Can't have peace without war.
To his own subjects, he also remained an almost stern, father-like figure, benevolent and caring, but willing to inflict severe punishment if necessary, though his engravings almost appear to plead with his people not to force him to inflict these penalties. For example, the forest people, or Adivasi, were told that despite Ashoka's remorse, he still had the power and will to punish them for their injustices if necessary. They should, he said, be ashamed of their wrongs, lest they be killed. Overall, historian A.L. Basham stated that while Ashoka could seemingly be a bit naive, he was still indefatigable, strong-willed, and imperious. Ashoka also worked hard to change the attitude of his subjects, not to force Buddhism onto them, but to spread his universally right values. The emperor, who had previously enjoyed pleasure trips of hunting and had wielded a mighty sword, now went on Dhammayatras, or pious pilgrimage tours, during which he visited holy sites and met his subjects. He frequently talked to local people to make sure they were happy, and would hear their compliments or complaints about local officials. In this way, he was the first Indian king to think of the welfare of the poor rather than just using them for tax revenue. As he stated, the finest conquest is the conquest of right and not might. The values he sought to spread were known as Ashoka's Dharma, a complex term which essentially were rules of good behavior in this particular context. For example, Ashoka wished that people would be obedient to parents and teachers, should behave properly towards holy men, relatives, servants, friends, and the poor, and should be kind and generous to the old and vulnerable. Non-violence towards all living creatures, be they humans, birds, or animals, was practiced. One edict in particular goes into detail about how the imperial kitchens will no longer slaughter vast amounts of animals for food. In addition to preaching these noble virtues to his people, Ashoka also sought to try his best to live by the same tenets. This was exemplified by his thoughtfulness in the construction and renovation of infrastructure. He ordered that shade trees be planted along roads for shelter from the sun and rains, that mango groves be planted in order to provide food, and that watering places be dug to quench a traveller's thirst. In 253 BC, a great gathering of Buddhist monks was held at Pataliputra, hosted by the king himself. At this, the Third Buddhist Council, a momentous decision was taken to send teams of bhikshus, Buddhist monks, to other foreign kingdoms in order to spread the teachings of the Buddha. These missionaries are said to have reached as far as Kashmir, Gandhara, the Greek Hellenistic kingdoms, North Africa, Burma, and Sri Lanka. One of the travellers was a man named Dharmarakshita, and is designated as Yona or Ionian in the texts, so it is possible he was a Greek convert. The most famous missionary of the period, however, was Prince Mahendra, Ashoka's firstborn son. In 249 BC, Mahendra journeyed to Sri Lanka, then called Tamrapani, at the invitation of King Devanampiya Tissa, an admirer of Ashoka and a man who wished to learn more of Buddhist principles. The subsequent mission to this realm was so successful that it gradually became a Buddhist country and remains so even today. Such was the legacy of Ashoka the Great. When he died in 232 BC, he was 72 years old and had reigned for 38 glorious years. Though his death would instigate the long decay of his earthly Mauryan empire, which fell after another half-century, Ashoka had ruled over the largest indigenous empire in Indian history with wisdom, efficiency, and most importantly, compassion. Buddhism in the 21st century is a world religion because the first steps to spread it to the world were made by Ashoka himself. Gradually, as the centuries progressed after Ashoka's death, the faith travelled along the Silk Roads as far as Tibet, China, and even Japan, despite its decline in the predominantly Hindu land of its birth. Writer H.G. Wells stated that Ashoka shines and shines brightly like a bright star among the thousands of other kings and majesties even unto this day. We have more stories to tell, so make sure you are subscribed.
That's actually pretty fascinating. I wasn't expecting so much because honestly, there are so many things I rant about, complain about, and the things that he basically saw firsthand. And the fact that that was 200 BC is just insane. It's obvious that we have known these things for centuries, and yet we seem to forget the fact that we just need to understand one another. The fact that we just need to get along. The fact that let's just open a form of dialogue to talk. It's about understanding one another, not belittling and demeaning and yeah. Thank you for recommending that, Loon. Why do I want to add A to the end of that? Yeah. Thank you for the recommendation. I actually do enjoy that. I love these history pieces. I used to actually watch these types of things all the time because that's how I get my knowledge. Like I said, I like history. I really enjoy history. However, I retain it more if I'm there physically, being able to see the structures, being able to, because it's just, but I think that's with everyone. Being able to see something in person can really drive you to things. Like here, I'm in America, there really is nothing historical here. Absolutely nothing, especially on the West Coast. Absolutely nothing historical here. It's all been here for the last 200 years. Well, especially here in California, it's all been here for about 100 years, maybe a little over, but I don't know the history of America. Who cares about America? But it's like, I would like to see like the Aztec temples, the Aztec structures, the Mayan temples. That's what I mean. The Aztec structures, everything that fell apart. I would love to see all those things. I would love to, it's just so fascinating to see. I know they had a lot of those same beliefs in those empires as well. It's insane. It seems like the more civilized we become, the less humanitarian we become. Yeah. Thank you all for watching. Talk to you next time. Toodles.